fun scene. Girl vision.
They saw his man boobs and they were like, good those.
Just seeing the parents' faces, if faces were all normal.
Hey, we're back, guys.
Hey.
What's going on?
Not much. How y'all doing? Welcome back to another episode of the Crowded Theater Podcast. I'm Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Cliff.
That's right. Welcome, y'all, to the Crowded Theater. Hey, guys, how y'all doing?
Doing well.
Doing well.
Not
Sunday.
too bad. Happy, lazy Sunday.
Good, excellent. So, we saw some cool movies over the course of the past. We've seen a lot of things lately, but we're here today to talk about something. You know, Cliff, when we started this podcast, we weren't sure if we were ever going to talk about new movies in theaters. It was mostly all old stuff because there weren't really a lot of good new movies in theaters the last couple of years, or nothing that was really drawing us out. But this week, an exception. Beetlejuice, the sequel to Beetlejuice.
Indeed, a sequel which looks like the original Beetlejuice.
Indeed.
Which is the biggest surprise of all.
Indeed, that is a very big surprise.
And spoiler alert, feels like the original Beetlejuice too.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, we're going to talk about a couple movies today because we ended up seeing Beetlejuice in theater, which was quite a pleasant surprise on a lot of different levels. But what also passed this month was a Friday the 13th, and so we've continued a long-running tradition that for Cliff and I certainly has gone back to when we were tiny children, tiny babies, is watching Friday the 13th movies on Friday the 13th, and recently we have been doing a bit of a watch-through of all of the Friday the 13th movies, and we happened to have gotten up to number 6-ish, and part 6 was playing at the Alamo. We went and we saw that.
Last October, we had gone through and watching all 1 through 5. Let's
That's
skip
right.
5, let's be honest.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that eventually,
But this time we got to an authentic Friday the 13th.
That's
saw
right.
A Friday the 13th movie on Friday the 13th.
Yes, that is the idea. Keeping that tradition alive as we have been doing since we were kids of watching Friday the 13th movies on Friday the 13th. We saw Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. How have you been enjoying our watch through of all of the Friday the 13th movies, Taylor?
I hope no one's taking shots for every time you're saying Friday the 13th.
Oh, no, I'm going to keep saying it.
But no, I'm really enjoying it. Friday the 13th is a really great franchise. I think it's just a great classic turn off your brain, and some turn on your brain, slasher films and flicks. This sixth one particularly being just the right line of deaths per minute. I feel like you really are just slicing through people with this movie.
Yeah, no, we were, and so just to kind of, before we dive in on both of them, we were kind of debating at the beginning whether or not these should be the same episode or different episodes. We had seen these two different movies, but I think despite one of them being a well-worn slasher that we have seen many times since 1986, and one of them being a brand new movie in theaters, these films both have deceptive similarities that we will talk about soon enough. Clever, uncanny similarities that perhaps inform more than we would expect from these films. We'll see. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna take a couple shots at it at least. Yeah. We're gonna see. Are they similar or are they not? We're gonna figure it out.
I sure do hope we find some similarities. We'll just have to keep digging until we find something.
There you go. But anyway, Beetlejuice.
Technically, both movies do have people dying.
That is true. They have a lot of similarities. First of all, they both have opening sequences, or at least large set pieces in cemeteries where the titular character comes out of a grave. So there you go. If you compare Beetlejuice 1 and Beetlejuice 6. Anyway, we have lots of time to get in all of that over the course of the podcast. We don't have to jump all in all at once. But Beetlejuice, guys, this is kind of fun. We went deep last time on Terminator. It was a heavy podcast. Cliff and I ended up having to solve a lot of very significant problems of the 20th century. But thankfully, we solved AI. We solved how we're going to defeat the machines. We figured all that out. It required a lot of research, but thankfully the word is out. People are informing Elon that we have cracked the code on that. But we figured after such a deep and heavy episode on AI and on James Cameron, very serious stuff, why not? This episode kind of feels like candy because it was a brand new movie, was just in theaters, and we are very, very familiar with the first Beetlejuice movie. We watched that a whole bunch growing up. So our first movie tonight is Beetlejuice, released on September 6th, 2024. The summary from IMDb: after a family tragedy, 3 generations of the Dietz family return home to Winter River. Still haunted by Beetlejuice, Lydia's life is turned upside down when her teenage daughter, Astrid, accidentally opens up the portal to the afterlife. Beetlejuice 2. How did you enjoy Beetlejuice 2, Taylor?
I really enjoyed it. I don't know if we've established already, but we have seen it twice in theaters, and both times were very, very enjoyable. I think once you kind of know what you're in for the second time around, you can kind of just enjoy the ride that much more. As always, I think the practical effects are great. The makeup was great. Very, very good time.
Yeah.
To summarize.
No, absolutely. And released on September 6th, 2024, the film is a Virgo, Taylor.
Oh, my sister sign. I'm a Pisces.
Yeah? You're
the other side.
That's right. So is this a Virgo film? Do we feel like it's a Virgo film?
That's so funny. I would say no. Virgos are very practical, very Earth sign, very usually the to-do list, the checklist, the very organized sign of them all.
Perfectionist.
And I feel like this story, while fun, I would not describe as an organized story.
I don't know. Or is it too organized? That's the question.
Do you just not see the...
Yes,
I would
that's
argue
the
that
question.
the Earth element is present in the fact that all of the sets were real, made of
There you
real
go.
physical element of Earth, rather than the whatever you call it is the element of the, CGI phantasmagoria playing out behind the green screens of most actors in most movies. But this, I say, if Virgo is connected with Earth, I think it has a very earthy look that very much evokes a weird feeling in the audience and in whoever I've talked to about.
Yeah, and I think we'll kind of get into the different layers of it, but my first reaction to it is the kind of magic trick of the fact that it feels so much, after a 36-year gap, it feels so much more of a piece with the original film, aesthetically, texturally, all of that, than any of the other long gap sequels that we have gotten. And by that I mean take stuff like Scale is Needed podcast favorite, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, another long gap sequel, which, by virtue of the fact that it was approached in a different way, in a different era, has a lot of CGI monkeys and things, that even if it were a stronger film overall, really does not feel at all like the same thing, the same type of cinematic object that the other film felt. It doesn't feel like it is a window opening back up onto the same world. And with this film, for nothing else, we can kind of get into whether it's them rebuilding the original house, whether it's doing a lot more practical effects, or just the miracle of the fact that Beetlejuice is kind of the perfect character for Michael Keaton to return to after 36 years and still somehow miraculously feel like it's the next day with that character.
It turns out a septuagenarian can much more easily pick up the mantle of a wacky, shit-talking ghost.
Yes.
Not so much a rough and tumble action hero.
Yes,
Didn't really
there you
come
go.
across in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but it turns
Exactly.
out you can still play Beetlejuice till he's 80 or 90, I hope.
Hell yeah, you can. And he sure certainly did. And so, again, that's maybe a great place to start. We can kind of build towards that. But this is a film that was obviously going to sink or swim with the performance of Michael Keaton. But there were so many fantastic performances in this movie. Beetlejuice. A long gap sequel brings back Catherine O'Hara, who she was fucking fantastic in this movie. But it was nice to see her. I will watch Catherine O'Hara in anything. I am a big fan. But what was interesting about seeing her in this is she basically, after playing Delia Dietz like a bajillion fucking years ago, she basically played almost the same character on Schitt's Creek, the sitcom Schitt's Creek.
That is the thing I was noting there. How is her playing of Delia Dietz in an elderly age differing from Schitt's Creek? And I couldn't quite distinguish too many different performance parameters.
And in that way, even like when Taylor and I a couple years ago, when there wasn't any talk of Beetlejuice 2 that we were aware of, we watched Schitt's Creek and we saw her and even in overt ways, like dressing all in different contrasting shades of black and white and just being very aloof and wealthy. And obviously that character has a slightly different voice and a slightly different affectations and all that other kind of stuff. But it's more or less kind of the same fucking character. So it was interesting to see her now return after having done that very successfully on TV for several years to doing Delia Dietz. What would that look like? Is it the same thing? And really, I mean, I think she just, again, continued to, it did feel more like Delia than the very, very sort of, I forget what the name of her character is on Schitt's Creek, but it felt like, Moira. There you go. It didn't quite feel like Moira. She felt funny. She felt very, I don't know, just good to see her back. Winona Ryder, the other person returning to the cast, I think they very wisely, made her character of Lydia Dietz sort of a frantic mom, barely able to hang on, really at her wit's end, having lost a husband, which is kind of the same gear that Winona Ryder's played on Stranger Things for a few years. And maybe it doesn't
I haven't kept up with the latter seasons. I only saw the first couple, but I imagine she still is playing basically that same energy.
Yeah, and it's weird, 4. And she's so committed to that character of playing kind of a woman on the ragged edge and fringes that she commits to playing it in interviews, when she appears, receiving awards and show on the Emmys. She's so committed to that character. Even years ago, she did on security camera footage inside of a store, stealing a bunch of stuff and walking out the door with it. She's that committed to playing that character. But no, that's the tough part. Is because if you look at the original Beetlejuice, there is a cooler than thou quality to Lydia Dietz, which the mantle of which is picked up really nicely by Jenny Ortega in this movie. So then the question is, how do you then write Lydia Dietz? And they do, I think they give her that the perfect role for Winona Ryder to play, by of course making her a spooky show, ghost house, haunted house,
ghost hunter.
There you go, ghost hunter. It's called Ghost House, I guess, but ghost hunter.
Combination between ghost hunter and whatever Bill Murray was doing in Ghostbusters 2 with the Peter Venkman show, something like that. Cross between those. Things.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. And also, of course, giving. In order to make it relatable for Tim Burton as a filmmaker, it's also a reason for Lydia Dietz to still have weird, freaky goth hair at 50-something years old, which is what's relevant to Tim Burton's life. It's like, what's it like being 60-something years old and still having weird, freaky goth hair and having to lead your life? And so he was able to address that, and so, that was very personal for him. But no, she definitely plays. I think I like that idea. I like the idea of Lydia turning out to be a ghost hunter and all of that. It kind of embraces the idea of her leaning into this uncanny ability, which is an interesting thing because it's almost something you could breeze over in the first film. She was a child. That's why she saw the ghosts and they didn't, or she was all gothy. But they really kind of make that a bigger part of the conceit of the movie, that she and then her daughter Astrid have this uncanny sixth sense like ability to see ghosts and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Good to see Winona Ryder playing crazy and frantic yet again. And of course, returning in spirit, God rest his soul, Jeffrey Jones as a stop motion animation version of himself, etc., etc., etc. I actually thought it was kind of ballsy just to make so much of the movie about his character as well. I was fully expecting them to just
never even.
Yeah, there'd be one line about a dead grandfather. We never really reference him because he's just sort of, he fell out of Hollywood for doing naughty, terrible things and stuff. So we don't want to draw any of that energy back into the film, especially these days when people are looking to cancel films over this and that. Any whiff of controversy is avoided at all costs. The idea that they put on Front Street that the whole film is organized around Charles Dietz dying, his funeral, his image, both his photograph, an oil painting of him, and an entire animated sequence happening around his character is really nice.
And
because
obviously kind of the jokes of his delayed death. He's like, and he drowned?
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, no, it was nice. No, I know, I dug the, and I like, and then
the goofy, silly bit-off head prop that continues to spit blood the whole rest of the movie.
The whole rest of the movie. No, that was fantastic. And I know, I like the idea that they were able to, without Jeffrey Jones participating in the movie, completely honor the character of Charles Dietz within the film, because again, the character is not the actor, blah 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 blah, but he was such a big and hilarious part of that, as I mean Jeffrey Jones was a hilarious part of so many movies of our childhood, like Howard the Duck. Remember him in Howard the Duck, Cliff?
Oh yeah, he owned that.
Yet to
it's
be
one
seen.
of the best.
I don't know.
In a future episode, if we'll find a theater that's playing Howard the Duck, we'll watch that.
Everyone at home, check out Howard the Duck. Jeffrey Jones gives one of the best ever demon-possessed person performances you'll see in a movie.
Very much a precursor to Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black. He plays a guy with a big old alien inside of him. And another underrated Jeffrey Jones performance, Mom and Dad Save the World, written by Ed Solomon and the other guy who wrote Matheson, who wrote Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's another film in that spirit. Fucking fantastic. And Stay Tuned with John Ritter, where Jeffrey Jones plays a TV executive who is also the devil. So these are all good movies. If you haven't seen them, you should see them. Anyway, Jeffrey Jones. But good to see his mug making its way back into the movie. But then there were also new faces as well. Like Jenny Ortega. Taylor.
Yes.
Jenny Ortega.
Go.
You just showed us that Sabrina Carpenter video that was very Death Becomes Her that had Jenny Ortega in it.
Yes. No, she Jenny Ortega is the new goth girl on scene, and she does a great job of it. So bless her on that. But yes, no, the new Sabrina Carpenter music video is very Death Becomes Her, very tongue-in-cheek in that end. And Jenny Ortega looks like the girl that all these songs are actually about. So it's even more layers of fun.
Yeah, we haven't watched Wednesday, have we?
We've seen a couple of episodes of it, and I've seen...
First episode.
Yeah, watch the first episode.
Maybe I've seen more than that.
Yeah,
then.
but she's... No, and she was good. I mean, I think she's in a weird way seems to be the reason the movie got made, in a sense, because... She seemed to be kind of this catalyst for it being made. She had a real big moment playing Wednesday or whatever last week. And we can imagine with an idea like this needing some sort of girl around which to build the movie makes sense. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've seen Winona Ryder go on interviews basically saying, oh yeah, I've seen people have asked why it's taken so long to do a Beetlejuice sequel. Well, I always tell the answers. We were waiting for Jenny Ortega to be born.
Yeah, there you go.
And so I think it's just very on the nose. Perfect. Yeah, sometimes you just have to wait for the right person to take on the right role to make the right story.
Yeah, no, and it seems like a natural fit since Tim Burton produced that whole Addams Family show and all of that, and she's there with her pouty goth face.
And of course, Wednesday Addams in the, I think, 1991 Addams Family movie is very much a take on, as played by Christina Ricci, is very much, a copy of Lydia Dietz in many ways as far as her look and cultural impact. So it naturally makes sense that an actress would go from one character back to the other.
For sure. Now, dug all of her stuff, dug her. And I guess without getting... So Jenny Ortega was in it, Willem Dafoe played a crazy fucking actor, cop, some other stuff. But with the Jenny Ortega thing, it kind of opens us now into the script of the movie a little bit, because the whole conceit of this movie is that they return to the small town, and Jenny Ortega is Lydia Dietz's daughter, and among other things, she fires up a romance with a boy that she meets in the town.
A really cute boy. Like, whoever that actor is, I hope he gets more, because he was a very good-looking face.
Yeah, and honestly, it as wrong as it could have gone, that whole idea of where that's, and again, light spoiler alert, but there is a romance that then has some twists and turns and reveals within it, as it's fucking revealed that the boyfriend's dead and he's a ghost. So
lovers
that's the
to enemies.
Spoiler. So anyway. But as that goes, I mean, as I feel like that storyline, first of all, could have gone very, very wrong if the romance fell flat, if that moment felt forced, if the transition into the reveal about him felt forced, and yet I found myself utterly kind of smitten and kind of taken away with it. It did not necessarily see where it was going, and then did not even see the further reveals from there about where that story was going. You could tell,
which was fun. Usually, you see those kind of twists coming from a mile, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm just in the story.
Yeah, no, and you can see an intentionality behind moments like when we're being introduced to the boyfriend's family, and we're in this tracking shot going through the house, and we're not seeing their faces, and we can tell that there is something that the script is trying to do. There's something that the filmmaking is holding back that they want to reveal about him, and yet we don't anticipate what it is, and we don't anticipate the full reveal of everything about him. And it's just, I don't know, it really worked. And I think, if anything, to take one big step back and talk about Beetlejuice for a second, is that I have heard other people complain about the script, about the being overstuffed, that it being there's too many things going on, and therefore certain elements, like also newcomer Monica Bellucci, who we'll get to, are somehow underserved in the movie.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes, there you go. And in a weird way, it's the kind of thing where I totally see those criticisms as valid. There is a lot of, there is a tremendous, if anything, the film is definitely overwritten. It feels like there's about 4 different plot threads, such that when you have Monica Bellucci's plot thread going, it maybe would have greater real estate to pay off in the third act, were it not for the boyfriend thread, which sort of takes over the middle part of the movie. But the boyfriend thread, therefore, kind of feels like it also terminates before it has a chance to really pay off in any significant way, so that we can return to Monica Bellucci. And if we could drop one of these threads, maybe one of them could be more fully developed. Blah, 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 blah.
Don't forget the dad thread.
Yeah, there's a lot of the missing dad thread. There is the Willem Dafoe investigating them all and looking to bust Beetlejuice thread.
And of course, the Justin Theroux trying to get Lydia Deetz' money thread.
Yes. No, all of that. And then Catherine O'Hara is a whole separate thread going through there about her humorous grieving process. And while that is potentially a valid criticism, and the film does occasionally feel like it has too much going on in it, it doesn't bother me in the movie in the sense that it feels like it is bursting with ideas, bursting with good ideas, bursting with ideas that feel like they all belong in the Beetlejuice world. And in that same way, and I really do kind of feel that way about the original film as well. The original film feels, and I think what's so magical and makes it infinitely rewatchable, is that it seems to speak to a larger whole world that one can picture just outside the seams of what we are seeing on screen. So we're seeing the dead bureaucracy of the netherworld, and there's that flat guy, and he's going between a wall, and there's skeleton people, and there's the Argentinian lady who's the whatever, and with her slit wrists, and you just have all this stuff that points to a larger interconnected world that still has its own weird, twisted, cracked mirror logic to it. And that's a hard thing to nail, even with a handful of ideas. And yet everything from Monica Bellucci's soul-stealing, staple herself back together lady to Willem Dafoe's weird actor guy with half of his missing face, to the Ghost Boy stuff, to all the other shit that they've thrown in, all feels like it's of that world. It all really works. And if anything, the film does feel like some of the things are treated a bit thinly, but just because they seem to be kind of bursting at the seams, no pun intended, Monica Bellucci bursting at the seams with good ideas and with fun stuff and stuff I wanted to see more of. So to the extent that the film feels like it doesn't deliver in the third act, I only feel it's because we wish that we had more minutes to spend more things with, or more time resolving any of those characters. And yet the film makes a clearly very deliberate decision, which we can get to in the end, to kind of take its screen time, really just fucking boot the plot elements out of the movie, literally dropping 2 of them down a trap door on separate instances, and instead devote the third act of the climax of the movie to a big, silly fucking musical sequence, which also feels in a way delightfully of a piece with the first film. So I don't know. I really, overall, I think that, overstuffed script, but I really just dug it, and I dug it even more the second time around. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'll let Cliff get some words in.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the overstuffed for sure, but it all worked. It all felt like a real normal movie. And kind of the overall reaction I got from seeing it, and also from talking to other people who have seen the movie and stuff, is that it just felt like a normal movie in a way that normal hasn't really felt in a long time. And there's a lot of things you could try to attribute that to. Could be that, you're not looking at a crazy CGI backdrop for everything. Could be that it's really focuses a lot of time on the characters and their interactions and performances in the scenes, that kind of care is not really given to major Hollywood movies these days for the most part. But overall, it felt like a kind of nice, normal movie. All those complications aside.
Yeah, and I mean, normal is an interesting word, but I almost feel like, feels like a 90s movie. Feels like a film from an era slightly before, when the craft of movie making seemed to be almost entirely lost by Hollywood, and also from an era before when everything on screen was broken, but we knew it needed to be there for some absurd reason that's off screen, that doesn't make sense on screen. Like, there was no moment where someone just stopped and gave and brought the entire movie to a screeching halt to give like a weird monologue about like Supreme Court justices or some other issue that needed to be, is the elephant in the room, quite frankly, and needed to be addressed. It, in fact, was a movie that was just there to serve its characters and to complete a story with those characters, and it worked beautifully. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing that, I do have to say this, sitting down a second time to watch it, if this film had been made 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, one would have to prepare oneself to watch it just for the onslaught of just like, of the sort of CGI phantasmagoria that would be put in front of us, of just whole netherworlds. I mean, I'm picturing, I don't know, the Ghostbusters remake or with the women and all of that. Just CGI ghosts, gigantic CGI world, just a bunch of spectral particles out of After Effects being thrown at us continuously, while all of the actors vaguely stand in a tight grouping behind in front of a blue screen. And the film doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, it doesn't feel at all like a film where 6 people were standing in front of a blue screen and everything else just sort of being filled in by some sort of animator. Therefore, it really can feel like you're in that world. Like the fact that they built the real fucking house and it's not a volume somewhere where they're approximating the house means that they can sit on the porch and the camera can point different directions and hold people in different angles and interact. And good.
I'll also throw, we saw Beetlejuice 1 at home, just, post seeing the second, for watching it the second time, and it is very accurate. Like, the attic is almost perfectly recreated. All of these different scenes, it really kind of helps keep the continuity of it all very much feeling
I mean, it looks
same world.
No, it really, they did an incredible job replicating, like beat by beat, replicating everything. I mean, the attic looks the same,
the diorama,
the house looks the same. Yeah, the model, everything looks really like it's pulled right out of the first movie. But it's just the fact that we don't notice all those ways in which, when you are working with CGI and you are having to work with blue screens, or now with the ridiculous Mandalorian volumes that they're shooting everything in, it radically reduces what you can do on screen, because vaguely everyone has to stand in a position where their background is a particular wall. They're all close to one another. They're all there's no foreground obstructions or anything that's tangible that would have to then later on be edited out by a CGI artist. And so it's why films feel flat and the actors feel disconnected from them, and why, despite the fact that we see all the different Marvel heroes showing up at the end of Avengers Endgame, it doesn't quite really feel like they were ever in the same place at the same time, because they've all clearly been composited together from a bunch of different CGI bullshit. Or even if they were all together in one place at one time, it certainly doesn't feel like it, because they're just sort of fake heads floating over, real heads floating over fake bodies against a fake backdrop. So just those moments where you can tangibly feel that. Think about how bigger and more robust the subway station set of the Soul Train in Beetlejuice 2 feels than any gigantic fantasy world, castle, fucking Grand Central Station of spookiness that would have been in the film 10 years ago in CGI.
They could have extended the background in all directions by 100 miles and put all sorts of giant castles there and an infinite train set going off into the distance, and we would all know it wasn't real when looking at it, and it would have, again, that kind of overcrowded, hurting your eyes with all the noise on screen kind of vibe. But no, they were on a set of a train station that probably was a train station, or was a set modeled after a train station, and it had ghosts in it that danced and did ghosty things, and that's what the camera was focused on.
Yes, and the camera could go wherever it wanted, and then the things that got in the foreground, like other people dancing, added compositionally and added to the energy of Jenny Ortega getting pulled onto the train and fighting her way off tangibly through other people, and none of that had to be sacrificed just so that there could be a really long fake ghost train or had to be sacrificed for any of that. It was just a really nice set piece that felt big and felt like you could actually walk onto it because you could, and it felt like a real fucking thing. Anyway, it felt like a real movie, and that's what was nice, is it had some kind of tangible quality to it and stuff. I don't know, man. I really dug it. I dug the thing. I dug especially the Mario Bava flashback that they had, which is interesting. They had the they released that as a clip ahead of the movie, and I saw a part of it, and it was very interesting. They do an extended 7-minute black and white sequence in Italian to tell the backstory of Beetlejuice and his first wife, whose name I can't remember. What was the character's name?
Dolores.
Dolores. There you go. How did you like that sequence, Taylor?
I really liked it. I thought that it was funny that they finally gave him a backstory. It feels very sequel thing. It feels like a very sequel thing to do, is to give the main character their backstory finally. I'm under the impression that is an actual scene from an actual preview movie. Is that?
Yeah, Mario Bava was a Italian horror director in the 1960s, and a lot of his cinema inspired Tim Burton style. And so Tim Burton is very much an homage to Mario Bava by putting it in black and white and making it Italian. I don't think it was an homage to a particular thing in a Mario Bava movie, but it was certainly very Mario Bava-like. And there's certainly been sequences in Mario Bava movies set in cemeteries with characters being killed or buried and stuff like that. So it had the vibe.
Yeah, all that stuff was all that stuff at the beginning was very evocative of, and if you want to, you at home can check this out yourselves, the film Black Sunday, which has a lot of those.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, a lot of those characteristic, what Tim Burton would have later on, like spindly black trees and fog, and just basically very expressionistic Gothic sets and expressionistic Gothic production design that was very grand and very bent and very spindly and very cool. And Mario Bava is an interesting guy. I don't think he was a painter and was involved in cinema from the time he was a child, because his father helped found, was part of some of the earliest cinema, working on some of the earliest cinema cameras and stuff I haven't looked this up in a long time, I'm just going off of memory here, in Europe. And so he grew up around cameras in the early part of the 20th century, working constantly, doing special effects, doing camera work. Didn't direct his first film until he was 45 years old. And this is the level of kind of visual stylist he was. He would, as a director of photography, they said that Mario Bava would just stop set and send the actors away for 2 hours, rather than light a large set, and would put up a piece of glass just on set in between the camera and the background, and would do a live matte painting there of a large castle or whatever he needed to create, and then bring the actors back on. And so he was basically just this tremendously gifted visual stylist who did not make a lot of movies and did not make a lot of tremendously successful movies after Black Sunday, but was hugely influential just because his films were so fucking beautiful looking. And I also thought it was fun then to see in the movie that they go right for it, and they say that Astrid herself that Winona Ryder gives birth to her daughter Astrid during a Mario Bava movie marathon.
Forgot about that. That's
Kill
fun.
Baby Kill, which happens, blah blah blah. So they make it pretty damn explicit, which is a lot of fun. All that stuff aside, I don't know, that sequence was fucking rad. I mean, I get people saying they thought Monica Bellucci was underserved in the film, perhaps, but I feel like she showed up to do exactly that, to be this spectral figure who participated in that awesome sequence, to be the finger from the first film when Beetlejuice pulls that finger out of his pocket and is like, she meant nothing to me, and then puts it on. It
was delightful as the very, very, very little bit of information we have about Beetlejuice's backstory that appears in the first Beetlejuice film is all very much fleshed out in this. He says he in a no doubt an improvised, well, it seemed like an improvised monologue about his qualifications when asked for it by the Maitlands. He mentions that he lived through the Black Plague, and so where do we see him in this flashback in Italy 1,000 years ago? In the middle of the Black Plague. And yes, the finger obviously from Monica Bellucci chops her up and all that good stuff. And yeah, he looks like it's like he effectively conveys that's the guy who would become Beetlejuice later. No, I believe it.
And again, it's another sequence that I feel like it's kind of brilliant, because if you were to go back and just do the origins of Beetlejuice and show him as a human, it could fall on its face very, 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 very easily. So what do? Well, one way to avoid it, is just you make it so hyper stylized that it feels somewhat at a distance from the movie as is. So, we see this version. We were so fixated on this. Oh my God, this is an insane Black Sunday homage, and it's all in black and white, and he's speaking Italian, so we don't have to hear what Beetlejuice's actual voice sounded like when he was younger or anything like that. And so you get to see living Beetlejuice. You get to see an origin story that is in, concert with what we know about him already. But at the same time, you never even question the idea that, yeah, of course, that's who he would have been when he was alive, because again, it feels black and white. It feels like it was a piece of cinema from a different era and stuff. So I don't know. I dug that a lot. And what else? Oh yeah, the Danny DeVito. The real moment I feel like when we fully got on board was when Danny DeVito shows up.
Couldn't stop laughing whenever Danny DeVito was doing that silly blue-faced, coughing, sputtering ghost janitor. That was great. Every moment. It was very brief cameo in the movie.
Yes, no, that was fantastic, and I thought that was really good. That's also just that moment worked for a lot of different reasons, or what kind of won me over for a lot of different reasons. One of them being I forget exactly what precedes it, is there's this French artist who dies by falling down a manhole, and they kind of use that as the transition into the underworld where we would have previously seen the Maitlands go, and when he transitions down there, instead of, again, a gigantic, huge CGI disappearing into an infinity of particles, new underworld, they're on the same, appears to be on exactly the same bent hallway, set as in the film in 1988. So the world, the literal world he drops down into, feels tangibly the same. And then presumably the guy who played the original janitor in the original film is dead. He was very old in 1988. So to replace him, you have, from Batman Returns, Tim Burton favorite, Danny DeVito, as this blue-skinned janitor guy, and I don't know. And then we follow him, and he lets Monica Bellucci out, and she sucks his soul out, and then she staples herself back together. And yes, you enjoyed the stapling part, right, Taylor?
That's my favorite scene.
Of course, yes.
What made that your favorite scene? I'm curious.
It just was she's very pretty to look at, and it's just very. There has always been an element of any kind of scene that I enjoy in movies that is just a thing being put back together, or a thing being stylized, being presented to you. For example, quick cutaway, one of my very favorite scenes in any movie is a Toy Story 2 scene where Woody gets fixed up. It's this very intense scene where he's got a scratch, and so somebody redone something to look new. And there's just something very nice and very cool to see her literally in boxes. Spoiler, we're going to go through the scene real fast. But literally in boxes, kind of each breaking them away, each body part slowly coming to life, each of them slowly being put together, how she puts them together, and all the little sass that her leg has a little bit of sass, her finger has a little bit of sass, and then she's finally all put together. It's like a very fun scene. Girl vision, from feminine gaze.
No, for sure.
Right.
No, and it was very clearly very cosplayable was my first thought.
Oh, yes.
Was upon looking as soon
Fight me for Halloween costume.
Exactly. No, as soon as we saw Monica Bellucci in the trailer, we're like, I feel like this thread is being included just for kind of girl internet, and honestly, I don't object to it. I think it was great, going all the way through. Who else was? Yeah, and then Justin Theroux was also great, playing the kind of manipulative producer of Lydia's show and all that kind of stuff. So
wannabe husband trying to take her money, yada yada yada.
Yes, no, that was all fantastic. And if anything, so kind of now that we've kind of talked about it, Monica Bellucci, ghost boyfriend, great threads that emerge over the course of the movie, and that's kind of the thing. At the beginning of the movie, if you just watch the sections where they're setting up Monica Bellucci's character, they're incredible. Like, you drop down in the underworld, you meet Danny DeVito, he's a blue guy, he lets her out, you have that fantastic sequence that Taylor was just talking about, you have her stapling herself back together, you have her sucking souls, you have Willem Dafoe gets introduced. It's all fantastic. Then we just sort of divert from it for a tremendous amount of time, which is totally fine. But we reinvest with the really thing. We're not away from it that long, but we instead now reinvest in Astrid, and we reinvest in this whole ghost boyfriend thing, which actually pulls us in to the extent that we're like, okay, by the time we start getting more revelations about who the ghost boyfriend is, it's like, okay, well, this is clearly the plot of the movie, and whatever the climax of the movie is, it's going to be a very powerful moment between Astrid and ghost boyfriend. And then ghost boyfriend leaves the film quite quickly. What's that?
I'm just trying to think of his name.
Something.
Something. It doesn't matter, but I'd like to remember his name.
Yeah, but they do some excellent things setting him up that, like, all the just obvious on Front Street stuff that he's a ghost, that just, I respect the movie tremendously for the fact that it did catch me off guard. It's like, wow, all your vinyls from the 90s and like all this stuff. We're like, oh,
well, because
okay.
the people, I mean, especially because it leans into it. People are, wanting to go back on old stuff. 90s vinyl's really big right now. Also the fun, like, Halloween costume reference of like him looking like Happy Days or whatnot.
Yeah, no, it's great. No, it was exactly him saying Richie Cunningham and her saying who? Yes, because even in the 90s, people still were watching Happy Days on Nick
But
at
what was
Night.
fun about that, though, is that even though you could predict very early on that he's a ghost or that there's ghosty business going on, because you don't see it's when you don't see the parents' faces, that's the giveaway.
Fair.
Otherwise, we'd have seen the parents' faces if their faces were all normal. But you didn't know. And they didn't really telegraph where it was going because the romance works so well in a straightforward way. It's like, okay, is this going to be a sweet ghost romance? And then he tells her that she's a ghost, but then eventually they get back together and that's the whole thing? Or is it what it turns out to be in the movie, which don't want to spoil everything, but yeah, it's not that.
Yep,
exactly. Goes a whole different direction.
No, it goes a radically different direction, which is fun. And then, so we assume that's going to be where the film goes, and then he kind of leaves the movie quite quickly, and I think in a way that pays off in a really fun way.
Yes.
And then we get Monica Bellucci rapidly re-entering the fold suddenly, and we're like, holy shit, she's still in this movie. And then her character leaves rather quickly, but still, and we instead, a lot of the real estate that would otherwise be devoted, as we were saying before, to the big dramatic confrontation between Michael Keaton and Monica Bellucci that we don't really get, or the big dramatic moment between Astrid and Ghost Boyfriend that we're assuming is going to happen, but that we don't necessarily ever get, instead becomes someone left the cake out in the rain, the MacArthur Park sequence. And I will say this, I respect that choice. I think it is a fantastic choice. I really like that sequence. I like how that sequence is done. If I have one small grievance, and maybe my mind will change on this over time, it is that I don't think MacArthur Park, Someone Left the Cake Out in the Rain, was the right song for the sequel sequence to the original Deo and Jump in the Line sequences. It was a great sequence. Clearly, it's a sequel to the sequence where Beetlejuice, actually in the first film, the Maitlands actually take over everybody and have them do whatever it is. Exactly. The two, what is his name? Henry, I forget his name. Anyway, Deo, Jump in the Line. In this film, they do MacArthur Park, which is a silly song. It's a funny song, but here's my objection, is that it is not a song that necessarily makes one want to dance. It does not have a pulse. It does not have a rhythm to it.
More of a musical theater type vibe rather than a party dancing vibe that the first two ones had. It very much felt like his musical theater, you know.
It's a ballad, it's a torch song or whatever, it's musical theater, it's something. And so when the other characters, so he takes over, he starts singing the sequence, there's this wonderful quality to both the Deo sequence in the middle and the Jump in the Line sequence at the very, very end, in the denouement of the original Beetlejuice, in that both are these huge expressions of joy and joyful energy because you can't help but kind of get up and want to dance with the characters while they're dancing. It literally leaves you dancing your way out of the theater after you see the movie. And yet with MacArthur Park, the characters do get up and dance, but you can even see in the way that, and you know that they were fucking put a lot of thought into this because they're like, all right, we've got Wednesday. She's going to dance. Someone's going to make a TikTok out of doing the dance that Wednesday's doing, except now she's Lydia Dietz's daughter, because that went viral with the whole Wednesday show, her Wednesday Addams dance.
Her prom dance, her homecoming dance.
Some thought was put into it, but again, when Catherine O'Hara, when her get up and they start dancing, it feels somewhat disconnected. The sequence, it feels spacious in the way that the original sequence felt energetic and kind of getting you into the rhythm of dancing and joy and all of that. It feels spacious in a way. That being said, there's a lot of great gags, just a lot of cool stuff that he talks, and it's a funny sequence. But I wish they had picked something with a little bit more of a beat you could dance to at the end, so that we could actually want to get out, almost as if the characters were just overwhelmed with boogie and had to get up and dance. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
Yes. Yes. What did you think of the dance sequence, Taylor?
The first time I saw it around, I felt like it was a little bit too long. I feel like again, maybe because the song itself, it was the first time I'd ever heard the song, so I was kind of waiting for it to build up into something bigger, and it just wasn't that type of song. The second time I saw it, I kind of was more of just watching the movie for the ride, so I kind of didn't think too much, enjoyed it, just enjoyed it for what it was. But I agree, I feel like if that song had even just like a smidgen more rhythm to it, or a little bit more oomph, I never even considered, because again, I didn't grow up watching Beetlejuice 1, so a lot of those movie beats aren't ingrained in me in the way that they are for others, so I didn't even see it as a sequel scene or sequel sequence. But with that in mind, it was an odd choice, because it didn't feel at all like something, for a finale at least,
Cool, yeah. Word. Well, cool. Well, so Beetlejuice. Good movie. I enjoyed it. But that was only one of two movies that we saw over the course of this week. We also saw Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6, you guys. That was a fun experience. We got to see that in a movie theater. Cliff, what do you think about Jason Lives?
Well, first off, anytime you can see a Friday the 13th in the movie theater on Friday the 13th with a full theater, it's a great experience, because those movies play like gangbusters for the audience. And none better, really, honestly, than Part 6. I'd say Part 6, having gone through a recent watch through of the Friday the 13th movies, what struck me most is how much more is going on quantitatively than in because of the larger Hollywood budget and everything. How much more is going on quantitatively than in the recent movies? I think it was a course correction from the kind of cheapo Part 5, but just as by way of a for instance, this is the only, I think, Friday the 13th movie where we actually see children.
Oh, yes, at Camp Crystal Lake.
Camp Crystal Lake, because we all know how expensive and pain-in-the-ass child actors are. They could afford a whole bunch of, and some pretty good child actors, which expands the whole...
snarky two boys come to mind right off the top.
Oh, yeah, no, those kids were fucking great, yeah.
And the number of kills in this is insane, because we have Jason as a, just going after it right from the beginning and keeping up a steady... So many kills that I forgot about many of the kills that were in here, like the couple who's getting affianced in a picnic in the middle of the woods at night, who are, I think, killed by both being stabbed while they're getting on their bike. Yeah. Completely forgot about that. I was like, oh shit!
I actually found a fun little tidbit about that, because I was really there's other parts of the series that I know a bit more about. Part 4 has always been our favorite. Part 3. It's like I didn't know I've always loved Part 6, but didn't know too much about it being made. It did not have it doesn't have Kane Hodder or one of the other legendary people. It wasn't directed by Joseph Zito like Part 4. It doesn't have Corey Feldman. So I was kind of looking into it a little bit before this and found out, and this is funny because I had the same thought about the motorcycle couple. I was like, where the hell did they come from? And found out the film was completed, screened, kids loved it, and the studio decided to give them a little bit more money to just add 3 more deaths to the movie. And so they added the death of the caretaker guy, who was the old man who was like, some people have a sick sense of humor. He was not. He was in the movie, but they added a death sequence where Jason stabs him with a bottle. Mm-hmm. They added the sequence.
He's killed by his drink.
Yes.
Ironically,
they added the couple being killed.
Were killed, I believe, adjacently to him. That was like a connected sequence there.
Yes, yeah. In fact, that was actually one of the things that is that they did the whole them watching him get killed thing. It was
let me guess. Was the third one the paintball?
No, actually, the paintball
was part of the original cut.
Paintball was part of the original cut. Actually, I'll tell you something fun about that too in a minute. But the third one was actually seeing the girl in the number 37 jersey get her head twisted off, because originally she just gets grabbed and then her head rolls out of the car later on, and she sees the decapitated head. But the actual sequence where you see her head get twisted off was added in later on. So there you go. So this was again. And in that way, the fun thing you can say about Friday the 13th Part 6 is that it is finally the film in which, Jason becomes Jason. It is almost the first full Friday the 13th movie as one would imagine a Friday the 13th movie to be. It only took 6 films to get there. And again, you can kind of say that about Part 3, and that it's the film where he dons the mask and all of that. But the film is still shedding the trappings of being a contiguous narrative series with characters all vaguely existing in the tradition of Psycho, but like a schlocky exploitation version of Psycho where they're ostensibly real, traumatized, psychotic people with mommy issues who are killing people, blah, 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 blah. And really, all of that ends in Part 4. We don't need to talk about Part 5 because it's not very good. But and we can skip directly to Part 6, where, and here's an interesting connection to Beetlejuice, funny enough, is the fact that Tom McLaughlin, the director, was saying that he wanted to bring in influences from gothic horror movies, like Edgar Allan Poe stories, not unlike the films made by Mario Bava, which is why the sequence begins with something that, again, we think of, and Cliff and I, you take for granted, and always took for granted, as being very natively part of Jason, and being very natively part of Friday the 13th, being very natively part of this movie and this series, but is really out of place in the series up to this point, which is we begin in a gothic cemetery, just like a Mario Bava movie, with people digging up a body as if they're literally to drive a stake through the heart of Jason, as if he is a vampire in an old Roger Corman or Edgar Allan Poe movie or a fucking Mario Bava movie, where they stab him with a stake through the heart, and then, of course, he's struck by lightning, nothing more gothic than that, and rises as a zombie from the grave to seek revenge, which is, I think, the Jason that, in a way, most people vaguely know. A giant, undead, supernatural, ghosty guy in a mask who can't be killed, who's chopping up kids.
It's him taking his final form, the form he would carry on throughout all of the movies to follow. Mm-hmm.
And that's the interesting, and that's it's worth mentioning. That's what sucks so fucking hard about Part 5 is the fact that, in Part 4, the final chapter, directed by Joseph Zito, it's fucking awesome. Jason is finally felled by his natural nemesis, Corey Feldman. So Corey Feldman murders Jason Voorhees. Finally, Corey Feldman puts him to rest. So they attempt a Part 5 where, still existing within that vague reality, a different copycat killer takes up the mantle, puts on the mask, and starts killing people, and who isn't Jason. And aside from that, it's a terrible guy.
Yeah, a couple things to note about that. Yeah. One, I believe it's been a while since I've seen Part 5. I believe Part 5 opens, actually, with a sequence that's very similar to how Part 6 opens. It opens with Corey Feldman coming back for a day of shooting to get rained on in a backyard. Digging up, or witnessing a couple of people digging up Jason's grave, and then Jason coming back to life. But then we see that it's just a dream, and in the real world, Jason is dead. And then, for the whole movie, We think Jason is alive. We think Jason is the killer, only for the big surprise reveal at the end to be the lame reveal that the whole time it's not been Jason, it's been just some guy. Which brings us back to our previous podcast talking about James Cameron, by the way, where James Cameron, I believe in special features for Aliens we saw recently, James Cameron articulated a very important point. If you're ever going to do a surprise, make sure it elevates it.
Yes.
It makes I forget the word he uses, but make sure that it elevates the movie or makes the movie cooler, not makes the movie lamer.
Yes.
Having a Scooby-Doo ending where it was not, in fact, the killer we all thought it was, but indeed it was the guy who had some grievance that no one cares about that was mentioned in the first act.
And it doesn't help at the same time that, maybe with a better script, with a better whatever, with a better filmmaker, the film could have worked or could have pulled off an idea like that. But I believe the director of Part 5 literally was like a porno director, and it was made super on the cheap. And so the performances in that film, as opposed to the Joseph Zito Part 4 and this film, literally feel like they're out of like a John Waters movie or something, but not in a good way. And that sort of non-professional actors, sort of porno without the sex in it kind of performances. So to the extent to which one might have otherwise remembered who that character was, have actually invested 1 second into the story that the script was like trying to set up in the beginning, to the fact that it may have been, that it was him the whole time at the end, only pays off if you create any kind of reality worth investing in for 1 second, and that just does not happen. You invest probably more in porno movies narratives than you do in Friday the 13th Part 5 when watching it is really not good. Which is why this is such a delightful return to form.
Oh yeah, indeed. Just make sure that your best parts of your movies don't stay in dream sequences. Make them just make the dream sequence the real movie, like what we saw in Part 6,
yes,
where we kind of took off from the world of trying to adhere to anything vaguely resembling the reality we live in and went into pure fantasy territory for Jason, which was the right move.
No, it absolutely is. I mean, you see this hard reset at the beginning of the movie where we're suddenly in this gothic world. We are no longer in we're in the world that, again, in the same way that Jason is the sort of Friday the 13th Part 1 is the sort of downstream result of the success of the slasher movie, which is the downstream result of the success of the, Giallo movie, which is the downstream bastard child of Psycho. Like, we began the 20th century with ghosts and haunted houses and castles and spooky gothic horror for a world that still believed in ghosts and goblins and the supernatural. And then as we moved into post-World War II and post-counterculture revolution, into the psychologizing of spirituality, all horror moved into this other paradigm of killers with mommy issues who have trauma and all this other bullshit from sort of Psycho on. And so you see the downstream bastard child, fucking inbred offspring of that finally arriving at Jason Voorhees in Part 4. So what do you do with that? You just go back to the previous horror paradigm, the one that existed, the one that films like Psycho were trying to break away from, ill-advisedly, the better horror paradigm, the one where there's ghosts and goblins and spooks and that sort of thing. You open in a big spooky cemetery, you bring Jason back, and then just to let the audience know, and again, in a way that, in a lot of ways that anticipate films like Scream and anticipate all of the kind of tongue-in-cheek meta-horror that would follow, they replicate the James Bond opening where Jason Voorhees slashes at the camera like James Bond and blood flies at everyone, and the title is Jason Lives, and everyone's here to have a good time.
And everyone did have a good time.
Indeed they did. No, that's and again, it's one of those things where the film is, overtly funny and humorous in a way that makes it feel somewhat similar in tone to Beetlejuice. And I know this sounds like a strange thing to be bringing up, but just think about it for a moment. Is Friday the 13th Part 6 scary necessarily? It is occasionally. There's some suspenseful sequences. Taylor grabbed my hand a few times.
There's certainly some jump scare type surprise moments.
Yeah, but a majority of the film is often very humorous character-based sequences that eventually end in a giant explosion of violence or someone getting their guts spilled or something like that, which is a lot of how Beetlejuice operates. You know, both films have titular characters being dug out of graves, and they both
have a belief in the afterlife.
Yes, both have a belief in the afterlife.
Implicit in one.
Both kind of have homages to Mario Bava and to spooky movies in them. And what is the significance of that? I wonder, and I've been thinking about this for many, many years, as we've been trying to make horror movies and all sorts of stuff. It's like, why were Friday the 13th, our Friday the 13th movies such a good fucking time, despite the fact that they are ostensibly about a bunch of people being chopped to pieces and all of our characters being horrifically butchered. Why do we laugh? Why do we find it all so very, very funny? Same thing with Beetlejuice. We see characters in Beetlejuice who are maimed, who are literally, quite Jeffrey Jones's character in Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is like right out of a Jason movie, has his top half missing and he's squirting goo.
And like a Friday the 13th movie, we laugh when the characters in Beetlejuice die.
Yes.
When Catherine O'Hara dies, it's a joke. That's a punchline. I guess that's a spoiler for it, but sorry. Yeah. But when much earlier on, when the French artist dies, falling down a manhole, it's a gag. It's always a joke. Yeah. When everyone dies, it's a joke. And that's essentially how it plays in Friday the 13th Part 6, where, the vibe in the Friday the 13th movies, you don't really invest much emotionally in most of the characters except for your couple of main characters, and so the other characters essentially exist to display a series of vices for which they will be karmically punished, and we kind of anticipating their karmic punishment at the hands of Jason. We look forward to see if there'll be a big, cool, fun gag at the end, like the girl getting her face smashed through the metal thing, and then the outline of her face coming through the thing. It's like, hey, that's a cool gag. Yeah. It's like, hooray. Yeah. So there's not much of a sense. There's not much of a sense being scared. And we're not really invested in her case. We're not really invested in her character that much. The only thing we know about her character is her daddy has a RV and she's kind of rich and stuff. And that's about the only two things we know. It's like, okay, cool, she can die. Whereas our couple of main, there's always, in a good Friday the 13th or any slasher movie, there's a couple of main characters you are invested in. You're invested in Tommy, because he's the guy who knows what's up, but no one will believe him. If only they could listen to him, they'd all be saved. So that's always a relatable character that you want to see make it to the end and be the hero. And then there's the one girl who believes him. Out of all the people who don't believe him, she believes him. So you want them to live, and you do feel scared when they are imperiled. But really, for all the other deaths, you're just seeing characters display vices for which they will be karmically and humorously often punished, and it's just fun to anticipate that.
Yeah, and in a weird way, that is the fact that is the thing that is similar between this and Beetlejuice, in the sense that both Beetlejuice 1 and Beetlejuice 2, Beetlejuice 1 has the karmic punishment of the Dietzes, is that they invade this space, which is, again, from their perspective, a haunted house. They gut the house, that is to say, they are so preoccupied with their own materialist bullshit, their own lives, their own careers, their own vanity, they don't notice the spiritual thresholds that they are crossing, such that the ghosts that occupy the house deliver to them the karmic punishment for all of their lack of consciousness, lack of awareness of all of the spiritual crap that they are trouncing upon. You see the same thing, obviously, in all horror movies and most movies, but you see it especially in the idea of Camp Crystal Lake and Camp Blood. You come in, you try and have either a bunch of hedonistic teenage sex, or just to start a camp in Camp Blood, and you are incurring the wrath of spirits that don't want you in the woods. You're incurring wraths of spirits who want to cleanse you of your sins, blah, blah, blah.
Camp Forest Green in this one, Kyle.
Forest Green's
the only. Is that the only one where they've changed it to Forest Green?
I think it is.
Straight back to Camp Crystal Lake.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
You're trying to hide from your past and be something else, and that past will haunt you.
Yes. No, that is a good point. the trespasses that they try and cover up, literally like like building a house on an Indian burial ground. They try and cover up Camp Blood, Camp Crystal Lake, and incur the wrath of Jason, who rises from the grave. In fact, the whole film obviously has the classic like sheriff, listen, this town getting over all that stuff that happened in the past type of a character, who's great. I thought he was fantastic in the movie. But it is interesting to think about. We enjoy these movies that see characters that display our own materialist and hedonistic tendencies, the Dietzes and their preoccupation with themselves, the teenagers who, are just out of the lake to have a good time and to bang, and with a lack of consciousness about anything that could be dangerous in the world, a lack of consciousness of anything, consequences for their actions and or responsibility, which is what the whole Jason idea is born from. The teenagers were having sex when they should have been watching Jason, and now he's dead, blah, blah, blah. They're throwing off their responsibilities and for the sake of hedonism. But we're seeing people who, in perhaps more innocent ways, represent the more trivial, less conscious, more distraction-oriented aspects of ourselves. And then we rejoice and laugh in seeing their entire structure of their lives destroyed and annihilated by a spirit, by a fun spirit who says, I've always been here, but my name is Jason, and I'm going to now slice you in half, and you're going to now no longer be a fun kid having sex. And then they are sent directly to the netherworld where they meet Beetlejuice. Same thing like with the artist throwing a big tantrum in Beetlejuice. He is throwing a big tantrum. He's preoccupied with himself, his own vanity. He drops down a manhole, and which is exactly the same character that could have then been slaughtered by Jason 1 second later, and it would make just as much sense.
Exactly. In fact, we never see what happens down the manhole, but I thinking it took place at the same time that Jason took Manhattan.
Yes.
And as we all knew, when Jason took Manhattan in Part 8, he was hanging around in those sewers. He died in those. He's still in those sewers, for all we know.
Yes.
And I think that's how those two movies relate. I think the French artist in the beginning was indeed killed
by Jason.
Toxic Waste Jason from Part 8.
No, I think that is definitely spot on. I definitely think if no one's written that movie yet, they should right now. We'll put it into ChatGPT. I'll knock it all out. No, but it is interesting because we think both of these Friday the 13th movies and Beetlejuice were peak good time movies when we were kids. And I think that there is an entire aspect, and I think that we have always been attracted to spooky stuff, and that's more common these days. Everyone has skulls on their stuff, and Lydia Dietz was an oddball goth girl, but now everyone's a goth girl, and so what does that even mean anymore? Blah, blah, blah,
It used to be that like Star Wars meant you were a movie geek, and to be a movie geek meant that you were a total social outcast, and that to announce out loud that you like Star Wars would cast you out of polite society.
Exactly.
Now, whatever the fuck is going on now with that.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it is interesting to then ask, on a slightly deeper level, like, so what's the deal with all of the skulls and the death and the good time? Is this just something that's perverse? Certainly slasher films were largely considered to be borderline pornography, but somehow worse because they're for really twisted people. They're violent pornography. That's why the first slasher film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, had all of the weird problems basically had to seek mafia distribution along similar lines to a porno film when it first came out. And this is barely 10 years later when Jason Part 6 is coming out. So there's this idea that this is just somehow perversity, this is just people who want to see gross stuff, it's just shock, and yet we know that the actual quality of, from being there the other day, seeing Jason Part 6, seeing it when we were growing up, is a lot of laughter and a lot of fun and a lot of silliness. So what is the deal with the idea of seeing gore, seeing death, seeing ghosts, and feeling happy about it? Is it just with you're a little bit different and you're a little bit twisted and you're a little bit gothy or whatever? I don't know. I think, in fact, and this is something that's interesting to talk about, is that it actually speaks to something that is far, 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 far older than just horror movies or slasher movies or even the 20th century. I would say that the middle 20th century and our kind of approach to these things is an exception historically. That historically, and one doesn't need to look further than across the Mexican border, stuff like the Dia de los Muertos festival in Mexico, and the all kinds of Tibetan death rituals, and to all kinds of other cultures who have a somewhat, if not celebratory, kind of ritual.
More colorful appreciation of death.
A more colorful appreciation of death, exactly. And one has to wonder why. Why is it that so many other cultures seem they can have fun with images of death, images of skulls, images of things, and yet that was a sort of anathema in middle 20th century Christian America? And I think that speaks to a similar issue to what we were just talking about before with Psycho, which is when you sort of lose a touch with, when we're talking about like gothic horror and mysterious horror and that kind of stuff, uncanny horror in the early 20th century, we're talking about horror that presumes the existence of an ensouled world, that presumes the existence of spirits and afterlife, ghosts, people who on some level at least presume that they have a non-corporeal soul that is going to go to heaven, and that in itself, if they at least believe in heaven and hell, gives us a spiritual dimension to play with inside them. But then that became old hat, and World War II happens, and then psychology happens, and women get on the pill, and it's a whole new world, flower children. You've seen stuff about the 60s.
I saw Forrest Gump one
exactly.
time.
So we pretty much have a handle on it. And all of that horror becomes old-fashioned. Well, it's very interesting that as we move into the secular materialist 70s, 80s, and 90s, all of that kind of stuff, as we move into that world, we associate images of death, certainly in the Western world, almost exclusively with suffering, with perversion, they're not even things to be seen. We don't look at dead bodies anymore. We don't handle wakes for our own dead anymore. That has been medicalized and professionalized and pushed out of our lives. We don't believe in an ensouled or spiritual world anymore. That has been turned into psychology. And now if you're haunted by something, it's because of something that happened. Well, it's literally actually what they make fun of in Beetlejuice. Justin Theroux's character perfectly exemplifies the 20th century idea about these things, as he's literally in Beetlejuice's office staring at a demon and saying, "You're my unpacked trauma, you're my unpacked trauma, you're my unpacked trauma."
Sums it up pretty good right there.
And that is the model under which all of these things have existed. So, and I guess this is my larger point here, which is the joy that we feel watching Friday the 13th, the joy that we feel watching Beetlejuice comes from the fact that it is a reminder of an ensouled world in a type of art and a type of worship that did not exist and couldn't exist in a materialist technologist, a materialist 20th century, because
or 21st.
Because if you invest entirely in the idea that corporeal reality, that this life is all there is, then, to quote, I think I heard Stanley Kubrick say this at one point, who was very much an atheist, he said, death at any age is a calamity.
He also said that he thought that The Shining was his most positive film. Why?
Exactly.
Because it implied a belief in the afterlife.
That is a good point. That is a very good point.
Very cynical, as someone who probably didn't believe in the afterlife. That's his very cynical take on that. But, nevertheless, in Friday the 13th Part 6, even though we don't see heaven or angels or anything, the fact that Jason comes back as a zombie means that it's implicitly there's God, devil, ghosts, demons, all that good shit.
Yes, there is something that is somehow satisfying to us about the idea, even if it comes in the form of a vengeful spirit, that there is meaning in the world, a meaning that transcends cause and effect on the temporal plane. That is to say that letting Jason drown and that his spirit and that wrong could actually bear into existence a avenging spirit that cannot be killed, and all of that. As dark as all of that sounds, it's somehow more optimistic than the 20th century view that, yeah, you're born and then that's it. That somehow is a window into a world we would prefer to live in, an ensouled world versus the kind of 20th century atheist idea of all of that. And I think that joy is our window into the kind of, let me put it this way, back in the day, in the Roman Empire, it's like we wonder how evil people must have been to have been able to laugh at seeing people be eaten by lions and all this other shit that seems completely psychotic to us now. Or we look at Mad Max Fury Road, the Chrome Boys spraying each other in the mouth and saying "witness" before jumping onto a car and exploding themselves out of existence in very much the same way, presumably, that because they talk about Valhalla and stuff, that Viking berserkers or kamikaze pilots, Godzilla Minus One was fucking owned. If you haven't seen Godzilla Minus One, see it. It fucking rules. Kamikaze pilots, would have done. We see people destroying themselves. These people existed in a world where there was a presumption that there was a spiritual side, that there was, just like we see with Catherine O'Hara in this film, a other side to the mirror, another side to the coin. So she gets bitten by a snake and immediately wakes up now in the netherworld. And now she is on the other side of the mirror. She is on the other side of that kind of corporeal threshold. Cool. That idea, we used to access that idea through a couple of different modes historically, spiritually. If you go down to like the full breadth of religious traditions in this world, there was, even in the Christian Western tradition, there's the idea of the difference between mysterium fascinosum and mysterium tremendum. So mysterium fascinosum, as in being fascinated, is the idea of accessing the divine through the appreciation of beauty, through the appreciation of light, through the appreciation of life, growth, all of these other things. Mysterium tremendum was this idea, and it's the thing that it'll sound strange, but it's something we're all very familiar with. Accessing the spiritual dimension, accessing the divine through fear or through a confrontation directly with death. The literal phrase tremendum means to tremble, to tremor, as if the tremendum is the tremor one would experience when one is experiencing fear.
Not like the tremors one experiences with sandworms.
Exactly. Different tremors, despite the fact that there are sandworms in this movie and sandworms in Dune. Worms are huge now. Worms are very big. But, and thinking about it, what is a worm like the Mysteries of the Worm from the H.P. Lovecraft? We're getting off on a whole thing, but they're also symbolic of death.
A lot of worms and a lot of stories.
A lot of worms and a lot of stories. But the idea is this. When you go, like you look at what are mysterium tremendum type rituals. They would be rituals that would involve going to a cemetery at night and praying there, so that when you felt fear, or when you felt the tremble of fear, that was interpreted as those spirits, the spirits of death, actually interacting with you, interacting with your spiritual body. And that was a conduit, a portal through which you could interact with the divine, through which you could commune with your dead relatives, through which you could talk to God, in the same way that Mysterium Fascinosum, walking into a beautiful cathedral full of choir music, could remind you of heaven and the light and all of those other things.
So you're saying that these folks went into a cemetery to hang out, and they weren't just drinking a bottle of vodka and smoking cigarettes so their parents couldn't see?
Exactly. This is what I'm actually...
something else in a cemetery.
That's what I'm saying. This is literally...
That's crazy.
But not just going into a cemetery. Going into a movie theater, say, to watch something... going into a movie theater, say, to watch something about to watch Friday the 13th Part 6. why do we get together in movie theaters? Why are we making this whole podcast about movie theaters in the first place? Is because I think to a large extent we go to these places for spiritual communion. We go to feel a connection with other people. But what is the conduit to that? You know, my mother certainly would like to go to a movie, an uplifting movie starring Dennis Quaid. And this is not an insult, but I'm just saying, like, he plays Ronald Reagan in a movie and he loves his wife, and that is going to fill her with a sense of connection to the other people in the theater, and that's going to be how she achieves catharsis at the end of that story. But we're doing the same thing when we see The Shining, and we're doing the same thing when we see Friday the 13th Part 6, and we're doing the same thing when we see Beetlejuice, which is we're going in and we're experiencing fear, but the fear is an uncanny fear. Fear of things that aren't real, fear of ghosts, fear of all of that kind of stuff. We are experiencing actually looking at our own death, looking into the idea that life itself isn't real and there is another side, getting a chill up our spine, maybe a chill up our spine in the same way we would get walking into a cathedral, and being reminded that maybe there is more to this existence than this. Maybe, in fact, we are more than just our bodies. Maybe, in fact, AI isn't actually going to come up with all the good movie and art ideas moving forward, and there might be a little bit more to it. I'm trying to tie it back in with last week's episode on Terminator to bring it kind of home. I don't know, but I think that we have
Terminator did not take place in an ensouled world.
No. Terminator doesn't. Well,
except by deeply implicit.
That's
if you really want to read into, okay, where did the real Terminator ship originate?
That's my point,
How did the original John Connor get impregnated? If it was all a time loop, blah blah. So deeply implicit if you think about it real hard later, but for the most part,
yes, I would say implicitly, yes. The reason Terminator works so well is that it deceptively does exist in an ensouled world wherein that time loop that gives birth to John Connor exists outside of time, and therefore is both the feminine aspect, therefore the spiritual aspect, literally giving birth, but also it is God in the machine, and within these worlds, though, and I think that you and I felt this when we were kids, anything that had monsters or spooky stuff or Nightbreed or Real Monsters on Nickelodeon, or Hellboy, I know that was one of Taylor's favorite movies, anything that said that there's a veil to this life that you can just sort of peel back and that everything is ghosts and spirits and one dances from this side of reality to the other and that there's some mystery to it, is tremendously spiritually relieving, because I think it's something that we intuitively all understand to be true, and I think that it's something that is intuitively what we are seeking when people are rediscovering these forms in the form of seeing slasher movies, horror movies, Beetlejuice, these kinds of things that are on the surface grotesque, but I've never been, we were just in a movie theater full of people, joy. So much joy.
Laughter.
Joy exploding off the screen. People like laughing at seeing the destruction of the human body in fictional form because it reminds us that, holy shit, yeah, this thing is just a crazy fucking go-kart and the wheels are spinning off and we just kind of got to hang together here for a minute because any second now we're going to be on the other side where Jason is, and then we're going to have to come back again. Witness. And then we spray chrome on our faces and we blow ourselves up.
We can only hope.
Yes. No, and I think
that's the best way to go out.
Yes.
Chromed up, exploding, jumping off the back of an 18-wheeler. That's how I hope to go out.
That is how I hope to go out.
But then I'd have to shave my head and my beard in order to fit in with those other guys. I don't know if I want to go that far.
Plus we would both have to get totally fucking shredded as well.
That's true. You didn't see any flabby war boys in any of those movies.
Which brings us, Cliff, to our final two segments of the show. We're going to have to decide between... Should we do one for each movie or one collective Jacked Award for this?
I would like to do one for each movie. Unfortunately, I really don't think Beetlejuice qualifies. I can't think of a single
That's
body
what makes
in
it
that
interesting.
That could be anywhere in the realm of Jacked.
I'll throw out the surfer cutaway gag that was shark bottomless. Had muscles, and he was probably the only muscular person we saw that whole movie.
There you go. But this is the Full Metal Jacked Award, in case you're just joining us, where I give an award to the most jacked person. Jacked meaning big, shredded muscles like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a movie. Now, Friday the 13th Part 6, that's easy. It's whatever's the fucking actor who's not
By
Kane
the way,
Hodder who's playing Jason.
I have
What is the
I have an
actor playing
anecdote to
Jason?
tell you about that you will actually find quite fascinating because it has a payoff. The actor, there's a lot of stuff that's very singular about this movie, and that Kane Hodder wouldn't take over until the next movie. Who played Jason in this movie? Apparently, it was a guy who was a club owner who the special effects artists, I was just watching this, again, this is available on YouTube, this is not a big secret. Special effects artists had dressed him up as Jason for an onstage stunt at his club with a hypnotist or something going on that he owned. But he was an ex-military guy who was super big and super intimidating, like abnormally large and thick. And after they made him up as Jason, he came out on stage as Jason. He said that they had all the effects guys had made lots of jokes that, hey, when they make Friday the 13th Part 6, we're going to come contact you to play Jason because you got the right, blah, blah, blah.
The right build.
He
fills out the costume.
Fills out the costume. And as it turns out, they did return to him, approach him. He had a meeting with the director and was not cast to play Jason. So that because the stunt people wanted a stunt guy to do it, and so the stunt coordinator played Jason for some of the first footage shot, which was the paintball stuff, which was some of the first stuff shot. And they said that if you see it, it's why a lot of that's edited weird, is that if you look and you see a full body shot, it's a different body type, and he's kind of man-booby, I'll be honest. It's a man-boob Jason, and the studio came back and said, nope, different body type for Jason after they saw the dailies for the first day. His neck looks a little thin, looks a little man. He just does not have the right silhouette. Like, you see him for like 1 second, but it's a different guy.
Plus, I think that whole sequence has just a slightly cheap feeling, kind of too goofy vibe to it, so I can get the sense that, okay, it's one of the first things they shot. Had to do a major course correction. Something wasn't working. Because that whole sequence does kind of stand out.
It definitely is the most overtly comedic shit. Where like the even the score is like ba-donkey donkey donk. It's just kind of feels a little bit out. But
they clearly sold the studio on doing a horror comedy, but not that comedy.
Exactly.
Guys. Pull it together. We need some scary stuff.
So anyway, they saw his man boobs and they were like, "Get those out of there." And so they instead went back to the club owner guy who they had talked to, whose name was CJ. Graham.
There we go.
So C.J. Graham, and we always say because Cliff was known.
I'm a Clifford Joseph Bogart, so my initials are C.J. and I often go by C.J. amongst family. So
Cliff is exclusively C.J. among family. He is only but a guy named C.J. Graham played Jason in this film, and was apparently very big and super jacked and ex-military dude, and that is why Jason looks so badass in this movie.
That explains it.
So Cliff, you're going to give the award to fellow CJ?
The Full Metal Jacked award clearly goes to a fellow traveler CJ. Absolutely.
Yeah, CJ Graham. There you go. Full Metal Jacked. All right. So clearly in this podcast has existed on multiple levels. There's been the level of us here talking about it, but then there's been this podcast interaction with the spiritual world. We've talked about ghosts, goblins, all sorts of other stuff. So to finish out the podcast, we have to turn now to, just like Lydia Dietz in her Ghost House show, to the spiritual world. We can assume that we know the meaning of Beetlejuice 2 and Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives, and we can assume that we can prognosticate about the future of this podcast, but we can only speculate because the only thing that tells us the truth is the cards, Cliff. Now, I have pre-drawn a tarot card to try and let us know about what are the hidden meanings that connect Jason Lives and Beetlejuice. Taylor, draw the tarot card and show it to me.
The Knight of Cups.
It is the Knight of Cups. Cliff, show the card to the camera that autofocuses. The Knight of Cups, in addition to being the title of a pretty rad Terrence Malick. I actually have not seen Terrence Malick's Knight of Cups. So Terrence Malick made a movie called Knight of Cups. I have not actually seen it. But the Knight of Cups, this is about, of course, movement and action, and the cups relate to the suit of one's emotions. Now, what were we just talking about a moment ago? We were talking about the fact that we seek out these cathartic rituals coming together in a large church-like space, a movie theater, to participate in the kind of mysterium tremendum death rituals that used to be part of even the Christian liturgy. If you've ever read Brian Marescu's Immortality Key, you'll see that even the Christian liturgy began as a kind of funerary ritual where people would take psychedelic drugs and celebrate the passage of our friends like Catherine O'Hara onto the other side. So we're taking place in these rituals. For what purpose are we taking place in these rituals? For that little bit of tingle, for that little bit of emotional catharsis that comes from the dividuation of realizing that we are not just corporeal individuals lost in the profane world, forced like Sisyphus forever to push a rock up a hill, toiling away in a meaningless existence, but instead are all connected, both here and to the other side. But how do we get there? Does it just happen naturally? No, we have to take actions, and that's what this means right here. This is the Knight of Cups. That means that if you ever need that feeling that you got when you were a kid, when you went to the movies, that feeling of that you were whisked away, and that when you returned back to your life, you were almost being dropped back off on planet Earth like it was a fucking UFO because it took you to another place. Ask yourself, is it just the movies that have gotten worse? Yes, they have. They've gotten a lot worse, but they're getting better. Beetlejuice 2 is good. Yes, they did get worse, but if you want to feel those feelings again, it is within the control of your actions. You just have to get your ass to a movie theater, to a crowded movie theater. If you get your ass to a crowded movie theater, you will feel the feels again. And if you wait for iTunes or you watch it on Netflix, you won't feel the feels. So if you want to feel Knight of Cups, the feels, you have to get on your horse, just like this knight, put on your armor, and get your ass to a movie theater. And I think that is a lesson for all of us. And by the way, where was Astrid born? In a movie theater.
There you go.
During a Mario Bava movie marathon. So think about that.
Absolutely. And one further tie-in there. The Knight of Cups, which in some tarot decks is also the Prince of Cups. Mm-hmm. I think in the Thoth tarot deck, it's the Prince of Cups. Of the various face cards, each face card represents a different one of the tarot signs. Now, last time we were talking about, since Terminator was a movie born on Scorpio, that the tarot card most associated with that is, of course, death. But the face card that is most associated with the sign of Scorpio is also, in fact, the Knight of Cups, Prince of Cups.
There you go.
So that is a Scorpio draw as well.
Yes. And, by the way, this podcast, I didn't occur to me until just now, will be releasing in the season of Scorpio, Cliff, because we'll be releasing later on in October around the 26th, which is the season of Scorpio. So there you go.
Perfect.
All fascinating. And this card parallels the Death card in that it also features the Knight facing the same direction. You have a Death Knight, except this is a Knight of Life. Knight of Death, Knight of Life. Fantastic, guys. I really feel like we're doing pretty good. First episode, we completely solved the AI problem. That's not an issue anymore. It will take slightly longer than a week for all of our ideas. Amazon packages being arrived, but don't worry about that. But it'll take slightly longer for our wisdom and our truth to disseminate out to the rest of the world. But for right now, we know that we have solved AI. And then in this episode, only 2 episodes in, we've solved the problem of life and death.
We've solved death, guys.
We've solved death. I'm saying that. You guys came in, you started listening to this free podcast, wondering, is there an afterlife? Should I have anxiety about death? What's the deal? What's the meaning of life? And in 90 or so minutes, however fucking long we've been going up to this point, you learned all those answers. So, I don't know. I think that's pretty good. 2 for 2. We solved AI and we solved life and death already. So, pretty good. How are you guys feeling?
Feeling fantastic.
Good.
Feeling groovy.
Good. Well, I think that's probably going to be how we wrap up then. By the way, for future episodes, we just saw a cool movie last night, a really awesome comedy that I can't wait to tell you guys all about. And Cliff and I just found out that in October, the Paramount may be in fact doing a legitimate movie marathon, just like in Beetlejuice 2, the Mario Bava marathon. They will be doing 4 horror movies, I think, in one day, so we may need to report from a actual movie marathon and see whether or not Taylor gives birth in the middle of it.
Oh, God.
She's not pregnant currently, nor will she be by that time, but we'll see. Anyway, all right, that's it, everybody. For The Crowded Theater, I'm Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
I'm Cliff.
And thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.